So we move on now to our second panelist. So I very warm welcome Sabine Mayer. So finally we got you in on technologically. So it seems to work now. So she gives us some viewpoints from the Austrian innovation landscape, in particular from the FFG, which is the Austrian Research Promotion Agency. She has gathered quite some experience over the years in policy or research and development policy implementation. Her current position is an expert at the FFG strategy unit, and she also has quite a good relation to Salzburg, because she was a member of the Salzburg Science and Research Council for a while. So know quite a bit also about the innovation landscape in Salzburg. So Sabine Mayer, we are looking forward to your viewpoints from the research and development perspective.
Thank you for this very nice welcome, and thanks also to ITG Salzburg for inviting me as a speaker. Can anyone give me a hint whether you can really hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, that's great, because we managed just to enter this panel like 2 minutes before, because we really had some technical problems. And I think this might be also related or relating to the topic of our talk, because we are talking about the support of digital technology. And we really struggled to enter this meeting until 2 minutes before. We thought it's about technology, and then we found out I was just sent the wrong link. So, I mean, it is an interplay of technology and human behavior. Anyway, before I start, I would like to very briefly introduce FFG to the audience, because I'm not sure if everybody is familiar with who we are and what we do. We are the national funding agency for applied research and development and innovation, owned by the federal government, namely by 2 ministries, by the Federal Ministry of Climate Change and the Federal Ministry of Digital and Economic Affairs. And with regard to the national funding we are providing, we address a really very diverse target group. It's companies of all sizes, it's universities, it's research organizations, it's non-profit organizations, intermediaries, etc. And we offer a really diverse and broad portfolio of funding opportunities, covering all different levels of research and development, from very small funding schemes such as innovation vouchers, patent vouchers, for example, to very big flagships like competence centers or lighthouse projects or test regions. We also cover more innovation-related funding schemes, innovation projects, living lab-like instruments, and also qualification measures, which really gain importance also in terms of digitalization currently. Now to today's headline, Resilience and Digital Future. Digitization we see really as a cross-cutting matter, showing in about 60% of our funded projects over the last years. And we also see that digital transformation is a matter calling for qualification, because we see a high demand in the respective qualification funding schemes when we launch a call. And now to resilience. Resilience currently is a real buzzword. I tried to look up the origin of the term resilience, and I found a source that says it stems from material science, referring to the elastic deformation capacity of a material to get back into its original shape after an impact. Nowadays, I would say, and also for our discussion here, the notion of resilience much more embraces also the ability really to change, not only to get back into your original shape, but really to change, to be able to deal with shocks, with crises, and to adapt to a changing environment. In general, I would say our economic system over the last decades has been optimizing with regard to efficiency, cost efficiency, not resource efficiency. This mainly resulted in highly efficient global value chains, for example, in just-in-time logistics. And something like security of supply has not so much been in the focus. So now we are talking about resilience. Why is this the case? Because I think the COVID crisis really unveiled quite dramatically the vulnerability of these highly efficient value chains. For example, when it came to the supply of chemicals for PCR tests or ventilators or protective gear. So our focus now would rather be on resilient economic systems. But coming back to resilience in economic systems, there is some empirical evidence. For example, from analysis, the Austrian Institute of Economic Research has been carrying out these analyses referring to company behavior and company performance already in the past crisis, in the financial crisis, like more than 10 years ago. All these and also current recent analyses, and all these analyses point into one direction. First of all, companies that are R&D intensive perform better in times of crisis. They are more resilient. They perform better in terms of employment, turnover, and export. And also whole sectors that are R&D intensive are more resilient because they are financially better off. They have a better equity ratio, so they are more resilient when it comes to crises like these, where some sectors and some branches lost their business opportunities during the lockdown completely. So this is really a strong point to invest in R&D and innovation when it comes to resilience with regard to crisis. But our own analysis show that really many innovative SMEs are underfinanced. And knowing this, and knowing that usually, also backed by the literature, R&D investment and innovation investment is pro-cyclical. I think we have to expect that private investment in R&D will decrease in the near future, which would not be a good development when it comes to economic recovery. So I think this is a strong indication that public investment is more needed and more important than ever, investment in R&D and innovation to support economic recovery. And this would give us a chance also to do this with some directionality, for example, to foster a more resilient, a more sustainable, a more climate protecting development. With regard to digitization, there is also some evidence showing that those companies who have invested in digital tools and digitization early enough didn't experience so many negative effects from the crisis than others, because they had the tools in place to organize remote working quite quickly and easily. They had their processes in place to develop new business models, for example, to adapt to the changed client behavior. A keyword is distance selling here. But on the other hand, we have to think about, are the IT systems really resilient? Do companies know how to set up robust and resilient IT systems? And is digital technology available for everybody, or are there gaps? And are we leaving people behind? This is something that I think really needs to be considered. So now what to do, how to support change towards a more resilient system? First of all, I think the first question that needs to be answered is there a willingness to pay for this needed redundancy and buffers to make resilience really work? This is more a societal or political question. But I think this would mean we need to challenge this efficiency paradigm we have been living with for quite some time. I think bottom-up funding will gain importance because we can't know what's the next crisis. We can't know what's the next sector or product or technology that will be crucial in the next crisis. I think it would be really good and useful to support companies to be more flexible and agile. And if you want, one could see carrying out an innovation activity, carrying out R&D is really a sort of training camp to be agile and flexible, because you have to deal with uncertainty, you have to learn to cooperate with different partners, you have to learn to think in different options and alternatives. So that might be a good way to go. And we saw already in the crisis that flexible companies really managed to access new markets, even in the crisis. For example, Palma started sewing masks, or we saw from a sister agency in the UK, Innovate UK, they approached companies they knew, where they knew their production processes and capabilities, and they matched Formula One companies with other companies, and they managed to produce ventilators that were really needed in this crisis situation very quickly. And we also see this, for example, in our COVID emergency call, which we launched in March, where companies are sort of deviating from their usual field of business and activity, and trying to find new solutions and also new markets. For example, a company focusing on advanced hearing aid devices now tries to develop protective bracing masks, supporting verbal communication by enforcing the acoustic signal. And also different, so to say, types of innovation might gain importance. For example, frugal innovation. Here we are talking about innovative solutions that are accessible for many and that are robust. This might be something, I don't know, like a test kit that works also in non-laboratory environments. And this is again a link to digitization, new business models, the ability to be quick and to develop new business models easily might gain relevance as well. So at the end, I would like to also draw a bit on learnings for FFG as an organization. Apart from the most obvious ones, we saw that remote working worked really well. We saw that online meetings worked really well. We had our online meetings with our beneficiaries. All decisions were taken really quickly, also by the ministries who are involved in the process, and our implementation was very quickly. So this is something we can really learn from. We see it's possible. And what we also learned is that we sort of need to rethink our programming to be able to implement broader and cross-cutting initiatives in a better way than is possible now in our rather fragmented current established funding portfolio. And we could also try to be a bit more bold and try to really implement bolder measures. And I would like to end now with an example from Business Finland. We exchanged some experiences with other agencies in the European context in the network we are participating in, and Business Finland reported that they implemented very quickly a funding scheme for small innovation projects for small companies, and aiming at supporting them in the crisis to develop new processes, also new business models, for example, with a total funding budget of 700 million euro. So that would be a real bold approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think the final statement, which that would be definitely an interesting thing to pursue further. So would you expect the 700 million for the future in terms of for such initiative? I know it's a bit provoking in that case, but
I mean, this is a question I cannot answer you, but if you ask me what are my expectations, of course not. I mean, our usual annual budget for our national funding budget amounts to like 650 euros, million euro, of course. So 700 million for one scheme would exceed even our normal annual budget in the past.
I'm aware of that. It was, I know that quite a bit of a more provoking thing. But another follow-up based on this and this alternative funding or schemes. So what you mentioned is probably the need to think about much more different ways how these schemes could be developed, or at least happening faster, more cross-cutting, more interdisciplinary maybe. Do you see it in that direction?
Yes, I think so. I mean, we are currently working together with one of our other ministries, the Ministry for Climate Change, because they want to implement a very strong and cross-cutting focus on sustainability and climate protection in all of their funding programs. So this is a way to try out now how we can implement such a cross-cutting initiative. And in addition, we are currently discussing with both of our owner ministries a new way of managing our portfolio, where we try to open up, leave the very fragmented system, not leave it behind, but so to say, develop it into a new system with more opportunities for applicants. And with a better oversight and less fragmented. So it should be positive for both sides, for the policy level, because they would have the opportunity for cross-cutting and bolder initiatives, and also for the beneficiaries, for the applicants, because they would have more alternatives and less fragmented system to submit their proposals.
So I guess even towards being faster and more finding new niches and new ways how to come over with some good ideas in that case. So at least what I got from that. So I just see if there's some question which comes in here. Not really. We anyway have a bit of timing issue already, as usual in this type of panel discussion. So thank you for sharing your perspectives. Probably you are still be a while with us, and probably have some final discussion at the end. Let's see. Thank you very much for your viewpoints from a stakeholder perspective in the Austrian innovation landscape. So I move on now to a little bit more application area viewpoints of resilience and digitization. There are in particular two, and which more or less offer some viewpoints how this works in different application fields and different application contexts, as I call it always. The relation about resilience and digitization. So I'm first happy to introduce Erik-Jan Kaak. He works as an innovation engine driver and project portfolio management at Spar ICS. Probably Jan Erik, you can say a little bit about the company from your side, because you know it better than I. And in particular, Spar is a very prominent and very big stakeholder in the retail, in the food retail area in Austria and abroad. And you are more or less responsible, or at least involved quite a bit of digitization issues, and have experience over several years in these digitization aspects. Erik-Jan, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for the invitation. As you said, I work at Spar ICS, which is the Information and Communication Services Department or company of the whole Spar group. We always say we are the IT in retail. Here in Salzburg, we have about 500 people working for 9 different countries, where we do a lot of work for all the different systems and stores that we have around the central part of Europe. We service around 83,000 employees in the whole group, and of course all our customers in the outside world. So when you're in a shop and you weigh your bananas and you put on the button number 1 and the ticket comes out, this is one of part of the work we're doing. But we're also running about 70 different websites and web shops all over Central Europe for all our customers. There's a lot of talk about crisis. I'm a social scientist, so we always look at the past, what happened there, and how people handled crisis in the early days. And if you look back around 125 years ago, there were also big crises in the different large cities because of all the horses. There were no other means of transportation, And in cities like New York and London, there were about 100,000 to 125,000 horses running around and responsible for transportation. And as you can imagine, when a horse loses 15 to 35 pounds of manure or 1 liter of urine every day, you can imagine how much filth there was in all those cities. And they had a very, very big problem. And it was a prediction that in about 50 years, they said the whole city of London will be covered with 9 feet of manure. So in the end of the 19th century, there was a big conference in New York where all the city planners and all these smart people came together in 1898 how to overcome this huge problem, because you can imagine not only smell in those cities, but also the dangers they had with diseases. And the big question also was there, when will this be over? It's the same question we had here over the last few months. And so they started this conference, and after about 3 days, they canceled the conference because they came to no solution. And as we already know in hindsight, 12 years later, in 1912, 14 years later, in 1912, this problem was solved, because at that point, people didn't know that automobile would replace all those horses. So it's always very hard to really look what's going to happen in the future. And in organizations, we handle this uncertainty with planning. As a good example, what you see is on this picture, is the airport of Berlin. That was the planning started for this airport in 1989. The official opening was planned for 2012, and it's still not open. They have monthly cost running now at this point of about 10 to 12 million euros every month. And for this airport that is not open, they're still every day working 300 to 500 people in that building every day. And instead of the planned 2 billion of costs, they expected to have 8 billion. So this is in a structure and in an environment in business where we always rely on planning. And when we do a lot of planning, we think planning makes us stable. Planning makes us predictable for the future. But what happens in a lot of companies is that you build up a huge amount of bureaucracy. And we think that out of this bureaucracy, it comes a stability. But the counterpart is true. When I talk about planning, or what the famous organizational theorist Russell Eckhoff said about planning, a good deal of the corporate planning I have observed is like a ritual rain dance. We think it has an effect on the weather, but it doesn't. And it seems that most of the things that are being done is about improving the dancing and not the weather. And this is what in a lot of companies are happening. We have all those rituals every year, every week in all different parts. And it's all about improving the rituals and not really the goal, what you want to achieve. This worked fine until the beginning of the 80s, when the first PCs came into the offices. So next year we have the celebration of 40 years of PC when IBM introduced the first PCs in personal computers in 1981. And about 10, 15 years later, this moved along very quickly with the rise of the internet. And we know everything that happened since then. I'm very grateful that Mr. Hawks talked a little about human behavior, because I think this is the central part. This is the central part of the discussion we need to have about how we organize ourselves and how we organize our work. As Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook a few years ago, his only goal was to pick up women. I mean, he was a student, he wanted to get in touch with other female students, and that was his aim and the goal of setting up Facebook. The picture you see here is exactly 5 years old. These are Syrian refugees on their way on foot from Budapest to Vienna. We all know the pictures from 5 years ago. And these people use platforms like Facebook to organize their escape out of those war areas. And Mark Zuckerberg never imagined that how people would behave and how people would use his technology and his platform. So what we never can predict is human behavior. And people always act differently and take the most out of technology, what they can get. A second example is, of course, next slide, please. A second example is this: as the guy who invented the camera for the mobile phones, we could never imagine that we start taking pictures and facing us like this, and the whole phenomenon of selfies came in. So also this is about unpredictable human behavior using technology, where technology is never meant to be used that way. Another way is for example, this. You have all those self-driving transportation machines will start in cities, and what they observed is that when people wanted to cross a crossroad, like this person here, people are very insecure or if this self-driving bus is spotting me when I'm standing here. So what this company did here is an English company that built these buses. They put eyes on the buses, and those eyes signal the person, I see you, you can cross the road. So there's a very interesting way that as they started to see human behavior, how that works. At the same time, you have this whole development of technology, all these new technologies, but at the same time, we still work in structures and organizations as we had 100 years ago. So this manufacturing job in 1920 in the US still looks the same as this office in the 1960s. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the manufacturing shop in 1920 has still the same image, still way of organizing as in the 60s. And not only in the 60s, but also in the year 2020, all those, next slide, please. The offices in 2020, where all the programmers sit together, they still have the same kind of organization. So as we have all this technology, the way we organize ourselves, the way we organize work, there hasn't been much changes there. There hasn't been much changes there. And we're still looking at models of organizations that have been designed in the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. There has been not much change there. So what we observe is that organizations see that the complexity of work that is going around, we cannot handle it anymore in our current organization. So they start huge amount of change programs, and they start to reorganize themselves. But what you see is that at the end of the day, all these projects came out with the same basic model of organization, which is our classical hierarchy as we know it. So we have an organization as it is. We start a change project, and we have basically the same model of organization at the end of the last years, there's a big buzzword going on, which is called agile. So all the companies need to go agile. But you see what's happening there is that they make their own little box, which is their own little small agile island. But at the end of the day, the whole organization as a whole doesn't change. The big failure we have a structural failure how we work. We separate different parts in organizations. We call them departments, and we made different people responsible for these different departments. And then we say, optimize your little department. And it doesn't work anymore in a complex world, because when you start separating the parts and then optimize the parts, and then you try to disassemble them again, that won't work. It's the same thing as disassembling a bike, and I say, okay, I buy the best parts of the bikes I can find. So and at the end of the day, I try to put them together so I will have the best bike in the world. This doesn't work because it's not about optimizing the parts of the bike itself. It's about optimizing how these parts work together. So what we need to start working on in companies, next slide, please. What we need to start working on in companies is not the optimization of the different parts, it's optimization of the interaction of the different parts. And this is a very new way of working. And what we see coming out nowadays is that organizations start to work as networks. There are examples of this, like Southwest Airlines, of course, the big ones like Google, but also a famous organization, non-profit organization in the Netherlands, Buurtzorg, Unilever, Haier, Gore. So a lot of companies that started more functioning as different self-organizing networks with self-organizing nodes. And these kind of organizations are far more resilient as the basic hierarchical organizations we know. Are there models for this? Yes. Are there best practices for this? No. Because again, we're working with human behavior. The guy in the middle here is Charlie Duke. He's one of the 12 persons that have been on the moon. We know the first 2, but nobody knows the other 10. And he was number 10 on the moon. And he was Capcom. He was responsible for communication on the famous Apollo 11 flight to the moon. And he said once, as we started this whole venture to the moon, we didn't know what we didn't know. And we didn't know that we couldn't do it. So we just did it. And instead of going in big plans, a lot of organizations should start just doing it. Just start it, learn from it, experiment from it, learn from that again. And you will see that within your organization, you will find a huge amount of surprises, but you find out also things you never believed your organization could do. And this is all about discovery. We need to have cultures and organizations that are able to discover and constant design themselves between uncertainty and certainty. We need to have organizations that are fluid like water, that find their ways around the rocks, and always are able to reorganize themselves. And this can better be done within networks, and this cannot be done within classical hierarchies. And still, yes, we have uncertainties. 110 years ago, people thought they could fly to Mars and pay 10 cents for it, but they didn't know what they expect when they paid those 10 cents and went behind those curtains. And this is what we're trying to do here. We're constantly reorganizing, reinventing ourselves within our organizations with a huge amount of very much professional people from all different ages. And to reassure you, next slide, please. To reassure you, and I can state this for fact, as this crisis started, there has never been a shortage of toilet paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we are quite happy that we haven't any shortage of toilet paper. But anyway, we have observed quite a bit of human behavior, so that people run after toilet paper in very fast ways. So anyway,
exactly. Nobody could imagine that this would happen, right?
That's right. It was at least interesting to observe from a human behavior perspective. So just to follow up on your last slide, so that means that your organization is prototyping and trialing with that type of constant change, right? Did I got it right?
Exactly.
Any reflections on that? What worked, what didn't work? Or any recommendation for all the participants here, if they really want to do it from tomorrow onwards, the same thing?
My recommendation, start with it today. The other recommendation is don't believe all the blogs that say 10 things you need to do for reorganizing. Right? There are no best practices in here. You have emerging practices. You need to start experimenting and learn from that. And when you finish your first experiment, you have a new status. And from this new status, you do the next step. And this is basic science. This is basic science. It's nothing new in there. The only point is, don't follow the big plan.
So
and you need constantly move between running your operations, but because I cannot start experimenting with 500 IT people here and then neglecting our basic business, which is offering all our services to all our customers in Central Europe in all our shops. But it's a constant balance between them. So
there's in a short version, I reflect the question from the chat. So how we can motivate, or how we can bring up, or what has to be done to motivate the more organizations to do that way? Because it seems from your perspective that there are too less best practices, so we need more, right?
Right. I always say you cannot motivate people. We need to stop demotivating them. A lot of our organizations are built for demotivating people. When I hear people have internal meetings, they call "Thank God it's Friday." They think, okay, why are you happy that it's Friday? Why don't you have organizations where you have your "Thank God it's Monday" meetings? Because we're all happy to go back to work again. So the first thing is we need to start at demotivate. So you cannot motivate people. You need to stop demotivating them. And this is very easy. You can start rebuilding rooms. You can stop doing a lot of meetings you have all day in your buildings. Start intelligent conversations with people. Let people just do their job. Let people do the work. There are a lot of examples there, and it works. And you can start on Monday.
Okay, let's see. Let's reflect on that. Hopefully we get a bit of experience which companies will start on Monday, maybe for the next discussion we have. So thank you very much for sharing us your thoughts.